The rain had a way of making Seattle feel smaller than it was. Each drop a tiny mirror reflecting the neon signs that never quite cut through the gray. David Mitchell stood outside the flagship cafe at 5:45 a.m., collar turned up against the November chill, watching the warm glow from the windows like a man studying a painting he'd forgotten he owned. The baseball cap sat low on his head, 3 days of stubble softening the sharp angles that usually commanded boardrooms 40 floors above the street. His reflection in the window showed someone else entirely. Just another working man seeking shelter from the weather, not the architect of 43 locations across 3 states. Inside his penthouse, 12 blocks away, the bed remained half empty the way it had for 730 days. Sarah's side still held the faint impression of her final months, the mattress remembering what David tried to forget. This morning he'd stood in the kitchen she'd helped design, staring at the La Marzocco espresso machine that cost more than most people earned in a month, and couldn't bring himself to touch it. The irony wasn't lost on him. A coffee empire built by a man who'd stopped tasting his own product somewhere between the 5th expansion and his wife's diagnosis. 3 weeks ago, Jonathan Pierce had laid the Coffee Corp offer on the mahogany table like a winning hand. $340 million. Clean exit. The board members had leaned in with the hunger of men who confused net worth with purpose. David had watched their faces, seen the calculations running behind their eyes, and realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd actually stood behind a counter and served a customer. Couldn't recall the weight of a ceramic mug in his hand or the particular way steam rose from a fresh pour. His grandmother Margaret would have been ashamed. The decision to go undercover had come to him at 2 a.m, staring at the city lights and thinking about Sarah's final request. She'd gripped his hand with what little strength the cancer had left her, tubes and monitors singing their mechanical songs, and made him promise something that haunted him more than her absence. Don't let grief turn you into someone Margaret wouldn't recognize. Find purpose again. In people, not profits. He'd kissed her forehead and sworn it, believing he meant it, then spent 2 years building walls so high he couldn't see over them anymore. Now he pushed through the cafe door, bell chiming soft and hopeful, and let the warmth wash over him. The space smelled like it always had, dark roast and cinnamon, old wood, and something ineffable that his grandmother used to call home. The original location, the one Margaret had opened in 1962 with money borrowed from neighbors and a prayer, had been torn down for condos 15 years back. This flagship was supposed to honor her legacy, every design choice a nod to those Depression-era values. But standing here now, anonymous in work boots and faded denim, David wondered when the honoring had become hollow. The morning shift moved with practiced efficiency. Behind the counter, a young man with an infectious smile called out orders, his voice carrying the kind of genuine enthusiasm David hadn't heard in a corporate meeting since ever. The name tag read Marcus, and he moved like someone who believed coffee mattered. Near the window, an elderly woman wiped down tables with careful attention, her arthritic hands slow but thorough, pausing to exchange words with an older gentleman who looked like he'd been sitting in that same spot since the place opened. Then she appeared from the kitchen, and something in David's chest shifted without permission. Elena Santos carried herself with a grace that transcended the faded uniform and sensible shoes. Dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, warm brown eyes that took in the nearly empty cafe with the awareness of someone who noticed everything. The wedding ring on her left hand caught the light as she lifted a tray, simple gold band worn thin with time. She approached the elderly man's table with a smile that reached all the way to genuine, set down a coffee he clearly hadn't ordered, and touched his shoulder with casual affection that spoke of years rather than transactions. David moved to a corner table, keeping his face angled away from the main counter, and watched. Through the window he could see the sky beginning its slow surrender to dawn, painting the rain-slicked streets in shades of pearl and smoke. The cafe was filling now, early risers shaking off the weather and seeking refuge in ritual. Elena moved through them like she was conducting a symphony only she could hear. A word here, a laugh there, remembering names and preferences with the kind of attention that couldn't be trained or faked. When she reached his table, her smile carried no recognition, just warm professionalism touched with something softer. Her voice held traces of an accent that suggested roots somewhere warmer than the Pacific Northwest. Good morning, welcome to Mitchell's. First time here? David kept his voice low, grateful for the cap's shadow. Just coffee, black. Coming right up. She paused, and he felt her studying him with the kind of perception that made him nervous. By the way, our blueberry muffins are fresh. Ruth just pulled them from the oven. They're kind of magical on rainy mornings like this. Before he could respond, a small voice cut through the ambient noise. Tia Elena, can I have hot chocolate? David's attention shifted to the corner booth where a child sat surrounded by crayons and coloring books. The boy couldn't have been more than dark hair falling across his forehead as he bent over his artwork with fierce concentration. He looked up as Elena approached, and his face transformed with unconditional adoration. Not today, mi amor. How about juice, dear? Okay, no argument, no tantrum, just acceptance that spoke volumes about what he was used to going without. Marcus called from behind the counter, waving. Hey, little man, want to help me arrange the pastries? The boy's eyes went wide. Elena glanced at the clock, did some internal calculation that David recognized as the math of a woman counting every dollar, and nodded. Miguel scrambled from the booth with the energy of someone who'd been sitting still too long, nearly tripping over his untied shoelaces in his rush to reach the counter. David watched Elena's face as she followed her nephew's progress, saw the love there mixed with something darker. Worry, exhaustion, the particular weight of responsibility that came with caring for someone else's child. She caught him watching and offered an apologetic smile. Sorry about the case. He's usually quieter. He's fine. The words came out rougher than intended. David cleared his throat. Is he yours? Something flickered across her expression. Grief, maybe, or old anger smoothed by time. My nephew. I'm raising him. She said it with quiet pride that needed no elaboration, then moved toward the kitchen before he could ask anything else. The coffee, when it arrived, was exactly what he'd asked for. Black, hot, simple, but Elena had added a blueberry muffin anyway. When he looked up to protest, she was already across the room, helping an elderly woman who'd dropped her purse, crouching down to gather scattered items with patient efficiency. The woman touched Elena's face with grandmother affection, said something that made them both laugh, and shuffled toward a table where 3 other seniors were gathering. David bit into the muffin and understood what she'd meant about magic. It tasted like something Margaret would have made, not fancy, just honest ingredients treated with respect. He pulled out his phone, ostensibly checking emails, actually observing everything through the camera's reflective screen. Marcus worked the espresso machine with practiced showmanship, narrating his process for Miguel, who watched with the intensity of someone learning sacred ritual. The elderly woman, Ruth according to her name tag, moved between tables with the kind of slow care that came from joints that hurt, but spirits that refused to quit. She paused at David's table, refilling his water without being asked. First-timer? Her voice carried decades of cigarettes and laughter. That obvious? Honey, I've been doing this 6 years. I can spot a newbie at 50 paces. She winked. But don't worry, Elena takes good care of all our strays. Before he could unpack that statement, she was gone, moving toward the growing group of seniors with coffee pot in hand. Their laughter rose and fell like waves, comfortable and familiar. David recognized it as something his quarterly reports had never captured, the intangible value of belonging. At the counter, Miguel was carefully placing croissants in the display case under Marcus's supervision, tongue poking out in concentration. When he finished, Marcus held up his hand for a high five that the boy delivered with full-body commitment. My man, you're hired. Miguel's laugh was pure joy. Elena watched from across the room, and David saw her shoulders relax fractionally, saw some tension ease from her face. In that moment, he understood something the board meeting hadn't revealed. This place wasn't just her job. It was her son's safe harbor, her own anchor in whatever storm had brought them here. The morning rush built gradually, a tide of humanity seeking caffeine and connection before facing their days. David nursed his coffee and watched the machinery operate. Elena moved through it all with quiet command, directing traffic without ever raising her voice, solving problems before they became crises. She slipped a bagel to a man whose card was declined, logged it as something else with practiced efficiency. She brought extra napkins to a woman struggling with 3 kids under 5, then entertained the children with impromptu puppet show, using sugar packets while their mother caught her breath. David's phone buzzed. A message from Claire, his assistant. Board meeting moved to Monday, 9 a.m. sharp. Jonathan wants decision on Coffee Corp offer. He stared at the words, feeling the weight of 43 locations and 400 employees pressing down like gravity. His grandmother had started with one cafe and a dream of feeding her neighbors during the Depression. Somewhere in the expansion, he'd lost track of which neighbors needed feeding. Through the window, he watched Miguel return to his coloring, now working on an elaborate drawing that seemed to involve a lot of hearts and stick figures. The boy looked up, caught David watching, and waved with unself-conscious friendliness. David found himself waving back, a gesture that felt foreign and natural in equal measure. He hadn't been around children much. Sarah's infertility treatments had failed 3 times before the cancer made the question moot. Sometimes he wondered if that loss had been easier or harder than losing her. The grief was different, mourning potential rather than memory, but no less real. Elena appeared at his elbow, refilling his coffee without asking. This close, he could see the shadows under her eyes, the way her uniform had been mended at the shoulder with careful stitches, the calluses on her hands from work that extended beyond this cafe. "Can I ask you something?" David's pulse kicked up. "Sure. You seem interested in how we run things. Are you thinking of opening your own place?" The directness caught him off guard. He considered his answer carefully, aware that one wrong word could collapse his cover. "Maybe. Researching. Best advice I can give?" She gestured around the cafe, encompassing the seniors laughing at their table, Marcus teaching Miguel the art of latte foam, Ruth carefully arranging pastries with arthritic precision. "It's not about the coffee, it's about the people. My late husband used to say ordinary moments hold real treasure." He was right. The words hit David like a punch to the solar plexus. His grandmother had said almost exactly the same thing when he was 8 years old, standing in her original cafe watching her give free coffee to unemployed men during the recession. "Ordinary moments, mijito. They hold everything." Elena's expression had gone distant. "He died 4 years ago. Cancer." She said it matter-of-factly, the way people did when they'd told the story too many times to strange faces. "Working here saved me. Having purpose, helping others, it made the grief bearable." David wanted to tell her he understood, wanted to share his own loss, but the words stuck behind the disguise he was wearing. Instead, he managed, "I'm sorry. Thank you." She smiled, but it was edged with old pain. "Anyway, if you do open a place, remember, people don't just come for coffee. They come to feel at home." She walked away before he could respond, moving to help a customer struggling with the door and an armload of packages. David sat with her words echoing in his head, watching Miguel color his picture with fierce concentration, and felt something shift in his chest like a foundation beginning to crack. The morning wore into afternoon. David stayed, ordering lunch, then coffee, then nothing, just occupying space and observing. He watched Elena give away items with creative accounting that would have horrified his CFO. She provided free soup to a homeless veteran who called her by name, logged it as dropped. She slipped an extra sandwich into a young mother's oat when the woman wasn't looking, marked it as waste. She paid for an elderly man's coffee when he came up $2 short, waving away his protests with easy grace. At 2:15, when the lunch rush had faded and the afternoon lull set in, Elena sat down at Miguel's booth, and the boy immediately climbed into her lap, despite being almost too big for it. She wrapped her arms around him, and they sat like that for a long moment, her chin resting on his head, his small hands holding her forearms. The gesture was so intimate, David felt like an intruder witnessing it. Then Miguel showed her his drawing, and David's breath caught. It was a family, stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun. The labels were spelled with a child's phonetic confidence. Miguel, Tia Elena, Abuela, and Mama Maria in heaven with angel wings. Elena's voice carried across the quiet cafe. "It's beautiful, mi amor. Can we put it on the fridge?" "Absolutely, front and center." "Will Mama Maria see it from heaven?" Elena's pause was weighted with things she couldn't say to a 5-year-old. "I think she sees everything you do, and she's so proud of you." even though I'm not always good, especially then, because you're trying. David had to look away, throat tight with emotion he hadn't given himself permission to feel in 2 years. When he glanced back at Elena was standing, smoothing Miguel's hair, saying something about homework before dinner. The boy groaned but pulled out a workbook from his backpack, chewing on a pencil as he hunched over simple math problems. At 3 p.m. exactly, a man entered who changed the entire atmosphere. He was tall, lean, expensive suit under an overcoat that cost more than Ruth probably made in a month. His eyes swept the cafe with the cold assessment of someone evaluating an asset rather than experiencing a space. Vincent Drake, according to the name tag he wore like a badge of authority, Regional Operations Manager. David had hired him 8 months ago at the board's insistence, never bothering to meet him in person beyond the initial interview. Vincent walked straight to the office without greeting anyone, his shoes clicking against the old hardwood with sharp purpose. Elena's face went carefully neutral, but David saw the tension enter her shoulders. Marcus and Ruth exchanged glances that spoke of shared dread. Even Miguel seemed to sense the shift, hunching lower over his homework like he was trying to disappear. 20 minutes later, Vincent emerged with a clipboard and murder in his eyes. He approached the counter, where Marcus was wiping down the espresso machine. "Register's off again?" Marcus's smile never faltered, but David saw the tightness around his eyes. "Just the usual coins versus card reconciliation stuff." "I logged it." "Logged it as what?" "Rounding errors, never more than—" "Where's Elena?" She appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, face composed into professional courtesy. "Vincent, didn't know you were coming today." That's the point of surprise inspections. He consulted his clipboard with theatrical significance. "We need to talk about discrepancies." "Of course. My office or yours?" "Here's fine." He looked pointedly at the handful of customers scattered around the cafe, including David. "Unless you want to discuss your theft privately?" The word landed like a grenade. Marcus went rigid. Ruth's hand trembled on the coffee pot. Miguel looked up from his homework with eyes gone wide and frightened. Elena's expression never changed, but David saw color rise in her cheeks. "Let's use the office." Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. They disappeared into the back room. The door didn't quite close, and David could hear raised voices, Vincent's accusatory tenor cutting through Elena's measured responses. He strained to make out words, catching fragments. 4 months, register shortages, $2,300, unauthorized giveaways, policy violations, termination. Marcus stood frozen at the counter, knuckles white on the towel. Ruth had abandoned her tables entirely, staring at the office door like she could will it open through force of concern. Miguel had tears streaming down his face, silently, the kind of crying children did when they'd learned that making noise made things worse. David made a decision that would change everything. He stood, removed his baseball cap, and crossed the cafe. Marcus recognized him first, eyes going wide, mouth opening in shock. Ruth made a small sound of surprise. David put a finger to his lips and moved past them, through the swinging door that led to the cramped office where Vincent Drake was destroying someone's life with numbers and policies. 4 months of consistent register shortages, 2,300 total. Head office wants answers. Elena's voice was tight with controlled emotion. "I can explain every transaction." "Theft is theft, Miss Santos. You've been giving away merchandise without authorization. To help people who needed, not your decision to make." Vincent's face was flushed with righteous authority. "Furthermore, I have testimonies that you've encouraged other staff to do the same." Marcus Green admitted to logging fake wastage. Ruth Campbell confessed to bringing unauthorized food items. "Did you threaten their jobs to get those confessions?" "I did what was necessary for the integrity of—" "Belay that order, Vincent." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Vincent turned, face cycling through shock to calculation to poorly concealed rage. Elena's expression was harder to read. Relief mixed with something like fear, hope tangled with confusion. "Mr. Mitchell." Vincent recovered his composure with visible effort. "I didn't realize you were— When did you arrive?" "I've been here since opening." David stepped fully into the office, aware of Marcus and Ruth crowding the doorway behind him, Miguel's tear-stained face peering through the gap. Watching, learning, And I heard everything just now. What? Sir, I was handling a personnel issue according to company. I also heard you on the phone 3 days ago. The lie came easily, built on speculation that proved accurate when Vincent's face went pale. Talking to Jonathan Pierce. Want to explain why my regional manager reports directly to a board member who's pushing a sale I've refused? Vincent's mouth worked, but no sound emerged. David felt the pieces clicking into place. The timing of the inspection, the aggressive documentation, the push to make this location look unsalvageable. It wasn't about efficiency. It was sabotage. You're building a case, David said quietly, making the flagship look like a liability so Jonathan can leverage it during Monday's board meeting. How much is he paying you? I would never, this is completely inappropriate. What's inappropriate is you threatening to fire someone who embodies everything this company was built on. What's inappropriate is you terrorizing staff to extract false confessions. What's inappropriate, David's voice went hard as granite, is you forgetting that I own this company. Mr. Mitchell, with all due respect, I was following protocol. You're fired, Vincent, effective immediately. Claire will have your termination paperwork ready Monday morning. Leave your keys and ID. The silence that followed was profound. Vincent's face went through several shades of red before settling on a cold mask of contempt. He pulled his keys from his pocket, placed them on Elena's desk with deliberate care, and straightened his tie. You're making a mistake, Mitchell. The board meets in 10 days. They'll see your flagship loses money on your charity cases. Jonathan already has 6 votes. You'll need 7 to block the sale. He smiled without warmth. Good luck. The door clicked shut behind him with final precision. David heard the bell chime as he left, heard the collective exhale from the people who'd gathered to listen. But his attention was fixed on Elena, who stood behind her desk, looking like someone whose world had just tilted sideways. You didn't have to do that. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, I did. I could have handled Elena. He stepped closer, aware they had an audience but not caring. You've been doing my job better than I have for 4 years, protecting my grandmother's legacy while I was counting profits and forgetting why any of it mattered. You barely know me. I know you raised your nephew when you didn't have to. I know you feed people who can't pay. I know you logged every giveaway as something else to protect this store's numbers. I know, he gestured around the office encompassing the cafe beyond, that this place works because of you, that people feel at home here because you make them feel that way. She was crying now, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. What happens now? Now I fight, for this place, for all of you, and I'd like your help. Why? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with more weight than 3 letters should carry. David thought about Sarah's deathbed promise, about Margaret's coffee cup sitting in storage somewhere gathering dust, about the empty penthouse and untouched espresso machine, and 2 years spent forgetting how to be human. Because somewhere in the last 8 hours I remembered what this was supposed to be about, and I need someone to help me remember how to get back there. Elena held his gaze for a long moment, searching for something in his face. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded, slow and certain. Okay, I'll help, but David, first time she'd used his name, and it felt like a gift. This is going to get ugly. Jonathan Pierce doesn't lose gracefully. And if you lose the board vote, I know, we all lose our jobs anyway. He glanced past her to where Marcus and Ruth and Miguel were still clustered in the doorway. But at least we'll lose fighting for something that matters. A small voice cut through the tension. Tia Elena, is the mean man gone? Miguel pushed past Marcus and Ruth, launching himself at Elena's legs with the desperation of a child who'd been holding terror at bay through sheer willpower. She caught him automatically, lifting him despite him being almost too big for it, wrapping him in arms that promised safety she might not be able to deliver. Yes, mi amor, he's gone. Miguel's face was pressed into her shoulder, but his eyes found David. Are you the boss? I am. Are you going to fire Tia Elena? The question hit David harder than it should have. He knelt down to be at the boy's eye level, a gesture that felt foreign and necessary in equal measure. No, your aunt is the best person working here. I'm not going to fire her. I'm going to make sure she never has to worry about mean men like that again. Miguel studied him with the unnerving perception children sometimes possessed. Promise? I promise. Okay. He held out his hand with formal precision. Thank you for helping Tia Elena. David shook the small hand solemnly, feeling something crack further in his chest. The boy's fingers were sticky with crayon wax and trust, and when he pulled away to burrow back into Elena's embrace, David had to stand up and look away to compose himself. Marcus cleared his throat. So, does this mean we're not getting fired? Nobody's getting fired except Vincent. David pulled his phone out, already mentally composing the message to Claire. But we have a lot of work to do. Jonathan's going to use this against us Monday. We need to be ready. Ready how? Ruth's voice was skeptical but cautiously hopeful. I'll explain tomorrow. Right now, he looked at Elena, who was still holding Miguel, both of them wearing matching expressions of exhausted relief. Right now, everyone should go home. Actual home, with actual rest. We'll regroup in the morning. The staff dispersed slowly, Marcus and Ruth collecting their belongings with the careful movements of people who just survived something traumatic and weren't quite ready to believe it was over. David stood in the suddenly quiet cafe, watching Elena set Miguel down and wipe his face with gentle efficiency, murmuring reassurances in Spanish that he didn't need to understand to recognize his love. When she looked up and found him still there, something passed between them. Acknowledgement of a shift that couldn't be taken back, the beginning of a partnership neither had planned on. She opened her mouth to say something, but Miguel tugged on her sleeve with insistent urgency. Tia, I'm hungry. Elena's face did something complicated. David recognized it as the expression of someone doing rapid mental math and coming up short. He pulled his wallet out before conscious thought could interfere. Let me buy you both dinner. It's the least. No. Her voice was firm, but not unkind. Thank you, but we're fine. Elena, we're fine. She said it with the pride of someone who'd heard charity offers before and learned to refuse them. Come on, mi amor. Let's go home. She gathered Miguel's coloring books and his backpack, checked that the cafe was properly locked down and headed for the door. David found himself following, unable to articulate why, but knowing he couldn't just let them walk out into the rainy evening without... What? What was he planning to do? On the sidewalk outside, rain falling steady and cold, Elena paused. Thank you. For Vincent. For all of it. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. She looked at Miguel, who was shivering in a jacket that was too thin for November weather. But I also need you to understand I'm not a charity case. I work for what we have. I take care of my family. I don't need... I know. And he did, suddenly and completely. She wasn't asking to be saved. She was asking to be seen as capable despite her circumstances. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a fight. And fighters need each other. She studied him for a long moment, rain beating on her hair, and Miguel's restless shifting, pulling at her hand. Whatever calculation she was running came out in his favor because she nodded, slow and measured. There's a diner 2 blocks over. Miguel likes their chicken and mashed potatoes. If you want to talk strategy, we'll be there for the next hour. It wasn't quite an invitation, but it wasn't a refusal either. David watched them walk away, Elena's arm around Miguel's shoulders, both of them leaning into the weather with the practiced endurance of people who'd learned to keep going when stopping meant giving up. He pulled out his phone and called Claire. David, are you okay? You missed the 3 o'clock with, cancel everything tomorrow morning. I need you to pull quarterly reports on the flagship location for the last 5 years. Customer retention rates, average transaction value, lifetime customer value. Also get me Robert Chen's contact info. I need to talk to our CFO tonight. Tonight, it's Friday evening. He's probably... Tell him it's about Monday's board meeting. He'll answer. David was already walking toward the diner, collar up against the rain. And Claire, I'm going to need you to dig up everything we have on Vincent Drake's communications with Jonathan Pierce. Emails, phone logs, anything that proves coordination. David, what's going on? I'm remembering what this company was supposed to be about. See you Monday morning, 7 a.m. sharp, war room at the flagship. He ended the call and pushed through the diner's door into warmth and the smell of coffee and fried food. Elena and Miguel sat in a corner booth, the boy already working on a coloring book, while Elena studied a menu with the concentration of someone calculating exact costs. David slid into the booth across from them, and she looked up with surprise that shifted to resignation. "You actually came. I said I would." Most people don't mean it when they say things like that. Miguel looked up from his coloring. "Hi, Mr. David. Are you going to eat with us? If that's okay with your aunt." Elena's expression was complicated, but she nodded. "Order whatever you want. I'm buying." She said it with defiant pride, making it clear this was her table, her nephew, her responsibility. "Fair enough." David caught the waitress's attention and ordered coffee, then looked at Miguel. "What are you drawing?" "My family." The boy turned the paper around to show stick figures that David recognized from the cafe. Miguel, Elena, an older woman labeled Abuela, and a figure with wings. But now there was a new figure, taller than the others, standing slightly apart. Miguel pointed at it. "That's you. You help a Tia Elena, so you're part of the family now." The simple declaration hit David harder than any board meeting presentation ever had. Elena's face went soft with affection and something like worry, probably wondering if David would reject the easy intimacy children offered without calculation. He found himself tracing the crayon lines with one finger, this crude representation of belonging he hadn't earned. "Thank you, Miguel. That's a real honor." "Do you have a family?" "Miguel," Elena's voice carried gentle warning. "It's okay." David looked at the bum, at his open face in unself-conscious curiosity. "I used to. My wife died 2 years ago. We didn't have children. Like Tia Elena. Her husband died too, and she couldn't have babies, even though she wanted them really bad." "Miguel." Elena's face had gone red. "We don't talk about, but you told me it was okay to be sad about it. And Mr. David is sad too. I can see it. Maybe you can be sad together, and it won't hurt so much." Out of the mouths of children came truths that adults spent years learning to hide. David felt his throat tighten, felt something in his chest crack wide open with Miguel's 5-year-old logic. Across the table, Elena had tears in her eyes, looking at her nephew with a mixture of mortification and fierce love. "That's very wise, buddy." David's voice came out rough. "Maybe you're right." The waitress arrived with their food, chicken and mashed potatoes for Miguel, a sandwich for Elena that David noticed was the cheapest item on the menu, and a burger he'd ordered on impulse. They ate in comfortable silence, broken by Miguel's occasional commentary on his artwork and the quality of the mashed potatoes, which he declared perfect. David watched Elena carefully portion her sandwich. Noticed the way she slipped half of it onto Miguel's plate when she thought no one was looking, saw her push food around to make it look like she was eating more than she was. The gesture was so automatic she probably didn't even realize she was doing it. The mathematics of scarcity made flesh. A woman who'd learned to go hungry so a child could have enough. When the check came, Elena reached for it with determined speed, but David was faster. She started to protest, but he held up a hand. "You said fighters need each other. Let me buy dinner for my team." Team. She tested the word like it might be a trap. "Is that what we are?" "I hope so, because I'm going to need help convincing a board full of venture capitalists that humanity is worth more than a buyout offer." Miguel was coloring again, humming tunelessly, only half listening to the adult conversation. Elena watched him for a moment, then looked back at David with eyes that had seen too much loss to accept easy promises. "What if you can't convince them? Then I lose the company my grandmother built, and 400 people lose their jobs, including you. But you'd have $340 million. Money I don't need to buy things I don't want." He thought about the penthouse with its view and its silence, the espresso machine that cost a fortune and made coffee he couldn't taste. "My wife spent her last months trying to make me understand that success without meaning is just expensive loneliness. I'm a slow learner, but I'm trying." Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying him with the kind of perception that made him feel transparent. "I knew who you were. On day 3. The confession hung between them like confession. David felt something shift, realizing she'd been letting him play his role while knowing the truth. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you needed to see us, really see us, not as labor costs or overhead or whatever your spreadsheets called us. You needed to remember we're people." She glanced at Miguel. "He's getting attached to you. Children do that. They give their hearts away without asking if it's smart. If you're going to fight and lose and disappear back to your penthouse, I need to know now, before he gets hurt. The question underneath the question was clear. Before we both get hurt. David thought about his promise to Sarah, about Margaret's legacy gathering dust in storage, about ordinary moments and the treasure they held. He thought about Miguel's drawing with the stick figure that represented hope for something David hadn't known he was missing. I'm not going anywhere. Win or lose, I'm staying. Because you're right, I needed to remember. And now that I have, I can't unknow it. Elena's eyes searched his face for signs of deception or temporary nobility that would fade with convenience. Whatever she found satisfied her enough to nod, a small gesture weighted with significance. Okay then, tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., your war room, we'll figure out how to fight. They left the diner together, pausing on the sidewalk where the rain had softened to mist. Miguel immediately attached himself to David's hand with the casual possession of a child who'd decided they were friends, swinging their joined arms with each step. Elena walked beside them, close enough that their shoulders brushed. Three people who'd been strangers 8 hours ago now moving together through the wet Seattle evening like a unit that made sense. At the corner where they'd have to separate, Miguel looked up at David with sleepy eyes. Will you come back tomorrow? I'll be at the cafe before you wake up. Promise? Sean. Promise. David crouched down, meeting the boy at eye level. Thank you for including me in your family drawing. I'll keep it safe. You can't keep it. Miguel's logic was irrefutable. I'm going to give it to you, but then you have to put it somewhere you'll see it every day, so you don't forget. Forget what? That love multiplies. Tia Elena says it all the time. Even when you're sad, if you love a people, it gets bigger and bigger until the sad is smaller. David felt his vision blur. He took the drawing Miguel was offering, folding it carefully and tucking it into his jacket pocket over his heart. I won't forget. I promise. Miguel hugged him with the unself-conscious affection of someone who hadn't learned yet that adults sometimes didn't want to be touched. David's arms came around the small body automatically, and he felt something in him break open completely. Some wall he'd been maintaining since Sarah's funeral finally crumbling under the assault of a child's simple faith in human goodness. When Miguel pulled back and took Elena's hand, she was looking at David with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude mixed with wariness, hope tangled with fear, and underneath it all, something neither of them was ready to name. Good night, David. Good night, Elena. Miguel. He watched them walk away, Elena's arm around her nephew's shoulders, both of them leaning into each other against the weather. At the corner they turned and Miguel waved, jumping up and down with the energy of someone who'd found a new favorite person. David waved back, standing alone on the wet sidewalk until they disappeared from view. His phone buzzed. Message from Robert Chen, his CFO. Got your message. I'll have those numbers ready by morning. Are we really doing this? Fighting the board? David typed back, yes, then added, for the right reasons this time. He pulled Miguel's drawing from his pocket, careful not to let the mist damage it. The stick figures held hands under their crooked sun, labeled with phonetic confidence and unconditional inclusion. He studied the figure meant to be him, standing slightly apart but connected, and felt the weight of responsibility settle across his shoulders. In his penthouse that night, David sat at the kitchen island with Margaret's old photo album spread across the marble countertop. Pictures of her original cafe, black and white images from 1962 showing a small storefront with hand-painted windows and lines of people grateful for coffee they could afford. His grandmother stood behind the counter in every photo, face alight with purpose that had nothing to do with profit margins. The inscription on the back of one photo read, 37 free coffees today. 8 more customers next week. Love multiplies. He taped Miguel's drawing to the refrigerator next to Sarah's photo, 2 pieces of his past and future coexisting on stainless steel. Worth more than Elena probably made in 6 months, the juxtaposition wasn't lost on him. Tomorrow he'd start fighting for something that mattered. But tonight he let himself sit with the weight of what he'd found and what he stood to lose. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle glittered with lights that promised warmth in other people's homes. David thought about Elena and Miguel in their tiny apartment, about Ruth's arthritic hands and Marcus's infectious enthusiasm, about 400 employees whose lives were numbers in a spreadsheet presentation. He thought about Jonathan Pierce's smug certainty and Vincent Drake's calculated sabotage and his own blind complicity in forgetting what his grandmother had tried to teach him. At midnight, he opened his laptop and began composing an email to the board. The words came slowly at first, then faster as 2 years of grief and guilt and accumulated wisdom poured out. He wrote about legacy and purpose, about customer retention rates that defied industry standards and lifetime value calculations that proved humanity had ROI. He wrote about ordinary moments and the treasure they held, about coffee that warmed hands and kindness that warmed hearts. He wrote until his vision blurred and his fingers cramped, and the sky outside began its slow surrender to dawn. Then he deleted it all and wrote 3 sentences instead. Monday's board meeting will determine what this company becomes. I'm fighting to keep it what my grandmother intended. I expect each of you to remember why you joined this board in the first place. He hit send and closed the laptop. Miguel's drawing watched him from the refrigerator, stick figures holding hands with unwavering optimism. David touched it gently, then moved to the window and watched the sun rise over a city full of people who needed what his grandmother had understood, belonging and purpose and the simple dignity of being seen. Tomorrow the real fight would begin. Tonight he let himself feel the full weight of what he'd committed to and the unexpected hope that had come with remembering how to be human. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of gray light that made Seattle feel like it existed underwater. David reached the cafe at 6:30, keys in hand, to find Elena already there with Miguel asleep on a bench, wrapped in a jacket that served as blanket. She looked up from the papers spread across a table, surprise flickering across her face before settling into something warmer. Couldn't sleep either. Kept thinking about Monday. He gestured at her work. What's all this? Customer testimonials. Started collecting them last night. She held up a stack of handwritten notes. Miss Peterson comes here every Tuesday because her husband died and the house is too quiet. Ron uses this address for his VA benefits because he's homeless. The Martinez family practices English a conversation here because we don't rush them. It's not in your quarterly reports, but it should be. David pulled out a chair, struck by her initiative and the exhaustion etched into her features. How long have you been here? Since 5. Miguel's school doesn't start until 8:30 on Mondays, so I brought him. He'll wake up soon and want breakfast. The casual mention of logistics revealed volumes. A woman who worked around childcare gaps because she had no other choice, who brought her nephew to work before dawn because leaving him alone wasn't an option. David thought about his empty penthouse with its spare bedrooms and felt the injustice of circumstance like a physical weight. We should set up a proper child care program for all employees with kids. Elena's pen paused mid-sentence. That would cost money. Less than losing good employees because they can't afford care. Add it to the list of things we're fighting for. She studied him with that penetrating gaze that made him feel transparent. You really mean it. All of this. I spent 2 years forgetting what mattered. I'm not going back. The bell chimed and Marcus entered with Ruth close behind, both carrying boxes of pastries that smelled like home. They'd clearly coordinated, arriving together with supplies donated from their own pockets. The gesture hit David harder than it should have. Staff investing their own resources to save jobs that were already precarious. Got cinnamon rolls and coffee cake from my cousin's bakery. Marcus set his box down with careful pride. She gave me the day-olds for free when I explained what we're doing. Ruth added her contribution, moving with the deliberate care of someone whose joints protested every motion. And I made my grandmother's lemon bars. Board meetings always go better with sugar. David's throat tightened at their faith in a fight they might lose. Thank you, both of you. Don't thank us yet. Ruth's smile was edged with steel that came from surviving 7 decades. Wait until we win. By 7 o'clock, the war room had assembled. Claire arrived with Robert Chen, the CFO, both carrying laptops and accordion folders stuffed with documents. Robert was a compact man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and eyes that saw through financial projections to the human cost behind them. He'd been Margaret's accountant before David expanded, one of the few links to the company's original mission. I brought 5 years of data. Robert spread printouts across the table like evidence at trial. Customer retention, transaction values, Comparative analysis with competitors. You're going to want to see these numbers. David leaned over the sheets, absorbing information that transformed intuition into ammunition. The flagship location had 94% customer retention compared to 71% industry average. Average lifetime customer value was $2,340 versus $890 industry standard. Employee turnover was 12% against 65% sector-wide. This is remarkable. Claire highlighted key figures with yellow marker. The flagship outperforms every metric that matters for long-term sustainability. But it loses money. Elena's voice was quiet, stating uncomfortable truth. Vincent wasn't wrong about the register shortages. I gave away $2,300 in 4 months. Robert adjusted his glasses, running calculations with practiced speed. Which generated how much in goodwill marketing? How much in customer loyalty? How much in employee morale that reduces turnover costs? He looked up, expression fierce. Elena, you invested $2,300 and generated conservative estimate $8,000 in value. That's 347% return. Show me a venture capitalist who wouldn't take that bet. The validation seemed to physically lift weight from her shoulders. Miguel stirred on his bench, rubbing sleep from his eyes and padding over to lean against Elena's chair, with the comfortable possession of someone who knew he'd be welcomed. She wrapped one arm around him without interrupting the conversation, and David watched the gesture with something twisting in his chest. Morning, buddy. Marcus held out a cinnamon roll. Hungry? Miguel's face lit up, and he accepted the pastry with both hands, retreating to his bench to eat with focused determination. Ruth followed with a glass of milk, settling beside him to admire his coloring books with grandmother affection. The domesticity of it, this makeshift family gathering to fight for survival, felt more real than any boardroom David had occupied. Here's the problem. Claire's pragmatism cut through the warmth. Jonathan Pierce doesn't care about return on compassion. He cares about quarterly reports showing the flagship losing $47,000 annually. Multiply that across 43 locations and you're bleeding $2 million. Except we're not. David had been doing his own math through the sleepless night. 22 locations operate exactly like this one. Community-focused, slightly negative on paper, massively positive in retention and lifetime value. The other 21 are corporate model profitable but hemorrhaging customers. 6 are actively failing. Robert nodded, pulling up a different spreadsheet. I ran the numbers last night. If we converted all locations to Elena's model, we'd see short-term dip but long-term growth of 18 to 23% based on retention rates. The math works. Then why didn't you tell me this before? David heard the edge in his own voice. Because you didn't want to hear it. You wanted expansion and efficiency and margins. I tried to warn you 3 years ago that we were losing Margaret's mission. You told me to focus on growth. The accusation landed like it should, square in the chest where guilt already lived. David absorbed it without defending himself because Robert was right. He'd chosen numbers over nuance, profit over purpose, and it had taken going undercover in his own cafe to see what he'd become. I'm listening now. Good. Robert's expression softened slightly. Because we have 9 days to build a case that convinces at least 2 board members to switch sides. Sandra Nguyen is already with us. She called me last night, furious about Vincent's tactics. That gives us 4 votes. We need 5 to block the sale. Claire consulted her tablet, pulling up board profiles. Margaret Hutchins and Thomas Wright are our targets. Both old guard, both knew your grandmother, both on the fence. Margaret's sympathetic but concerned about fiduciary duty. Thomas wants proof the model scales. Then we give them proof, Elena spoke with quiet certainty. We document everything, every customer story, every retention stat, every dollar of value created. We show them Margaret's legacy isn't just nostalgia, it's better business. The next 3 hours dissolved into organized chaos. Marcus called other location managers, gathering stories of community impact that never made it into official reports. Ruth compiled testimonials with meticulous care, her handwriting shaky but determined. Elena worked the phones, reaching out to customers she'd helped over 4 years, asking them to put their experiences in writing. Miguel colored contentedly, occasionally bringing his artwork to show David, who found himself critiquing stick figure compositions with unexpected sincerity. The boy's presence was grounding, a reminder that the fight wasn't abstract. It was about families and futures and the small dignities that made survival bearable. At 10 o'clock, David's phone rang. Jonathan Pierce calling with the predatory timing of someone who sensed vulnerability. David, heard you had an incident with Vincent yesterday. Vincent no longer works for us. So I gathered. Unfortunate. He was very good at his job. His job was sabotaging my company on your orders. Silence stretched across the line, weighted with calculation. When Jonathan spoke again, his voice carried amused respect. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. But firing Vincent won't change Monday's outcome. I have the votes. We'll see. David, listen, I'm calling because I respect what you're trying to do. So I have a revised offer. Coffee Corp will keep all 43 locations open, maintain all employees for minimum 18 months, and match your community programs dollar for dollar. $350 million cash. You walk away a hero. The number hit different in daylight, surrounded by people whose jobs depended on his choice. David watched Elena across the room, explaining something to Miguel with patient attention, and felt the weight of responsibility press down. What's the catch? No catch, everyone wins. Employees keep jobs, you get generational wealth, Coffee Corp gets proven locations. It's good business. And you get a $50 million finder's fee. Jonathan's laugh was genuine. I'm a businessman, David, but that doesn't make this a bad deal. Think about it. You've already lost 2 years to grief. Take the money, travel, find someone new, let professionals handle the headache. My grandmother would be ashamed of me. Your grandmother's dead, and she'd want you to be happy, not martyring yourself for minimum wage workers who'll forget you in 6 months. The callousness was designed to provoke, but David heard the truth underneath. Jonathan genuinely believed human connection was transactional, that loyalty could be bought or rendered obsolete by time. It was the philosophy that had driven David for 2 years, and recognizing it in someone else made him sick. I'll take my chances with the vote. Your funeral. Board meets Monday at 9. Don't be late. The line went dead. David lowered the phone to find Elena watching him, Miguel still chattering beside her, but her attention focused entirely on reading his expression. That was Jonathan? Making a better offer, guaranteed jobs, match programs, everyone wins. Except it's built on thinking people are replaceable. That community is a line item. He crossed to the table, picking up one of the testimonials Ruth had compiled. Mrs. Peterson wrote that this cafe is the only place she talks to anyone besides her cat. Ron said you're the reason he stayed sober for 18 months. The Martinez family credits you with their kids learning English. Elena's eyes had gone bright with unshed tears. We're still just a coffee shop. No, you're a sanctuary. That's what my grandmother built. And it's what I almost destroyed chasing growth. Jonathan doesn't understand that you can't replicate sanctuary with corporate policy and match donations. It has to be lived. Miguel tugged on David's sleeve, holding up a drawing. Look, I made you a superhero cape. The stick figure wearing a cape had David's distinctive height and Elena's patient posture, holding hands with a smaller figure clearly meant to be Miguel. The label read, Super Family. Family is spelled F-A-M-I-L-Y. Elena started to correct him, but Miguel shook his head with 5-year-old conviction. No, it's family because family is when people are fam to each other. Like friends, but better. David felt something in him break open again, this child's phonetic logic cutting to truth adults complicated with conditions. He knelt down to Miguel's level, accepting the drawing with the gravity it deserved. Thank you. This is the best thing anyone's given me in a long time. You have to keep it forever. I will, I promise. Elena watched the exchange with an expression David couldn't parse. Tenderness mixed with fear, hope tangled with the wariness of someone who'd learned that good things often got taken away. When Miguel returned to his coloring, she moved closer to David, voice pitched low enough that only he could hear. He's getting really attached to you. I know. If we lose Monday, if you sell and leave, it's going to hurt him. Children don't understand business decisions. They just know when people disappear. The warning was for Miguel, but also for her, David realized. She was protecting both of them from investing in someone who might prove temporary. He met her gaze directly, holding it until she couldn't look away. I told you I'm not leaving. Win or lose, I'm staying. Because this matters more than the money. Does it? Or are you just tired of being lonely? The question was searingly honest, cutting through noble intentions to motivation's murky core. David considered deflecting, but Elena deserved better than comfortable lies. Both probably. I am tired of being lonely, but that doesn't make this less real. You showed me what I'd forgotten, that business without humanity is just expensive isolation. Whether the board votes my way or not, I can't unknow that now. Elena held his gaze for another beat, searching for cracks in his certainty. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly, acceptance settling across her features. Okay, then let's make sure Monday goes our way. The weekend blurred into a marathon of preparation. David spent Saturday afternoon visiting other locations, talking to managers and staff, hearing stories that never made it into Vincent's reports. In Portland, the manager had started a food drive for homeless families. In Sacramento, an employee taught free English classes after her shift. In Spokane, the staff had organized a support group for domestic violence survivors, meeting Wednesday evenings in the cafe's back room. The pattern was everywhere. People using Margaret's cafes as launching points for community care, doing it without authorization or budget because it felt right. David documented everything, taking photos and collecting testimonials, building a case that compassion wasn't charity, but competitive advantage. By Sunday evening, he had 300 pages of evidence that humanity had return on investment. But the real work happened in quieter moments. Sunday afternoon, Elena invited him to her apartment, ostensibly to review materials, but actually because Miguel had asked if Mr. David could see his room. The invitation felt significant, a crossing of boundaries from professional to personal that couldn't be easily undone. Elena's apartment was a study in dignity, maintained through scarcity. The furniture was worn but clean, the walls decorated with Miguel's artwork and family photos that told stories of people who smiled despite circumstances. The small kitchen had a window box where herbs grew in recycled containers, evidence of someone who found beauty in constraints. Rosa sat at the table, leg elevated after her surgery, watching Spanish-language news with the volume low. "Mama, this is David Mitchell, my boss." Rosa's eyes were sharp despite her age, taking David's measure with grandmother precision. "The one who fired the mean man?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Vincent was a—" She said something in Spanish that David didn't understand, but Miguel giggled at. "Sit. You want coffee?" "I can make it." Elena started, but Rosa waved her off. "I'm not an invalid." "David, black? I saw you drink it at the cafe." He blinked, surprised she'd noticed him during his undercover observation. "Yes, thank you." Miguel grabbed his hand, pulling him toward a bedroom barely big enough for a twin bed and a small dresser. Drawings covered every available surface, taped to walls with the abandon of a child whose creativity exceeded his canvas. David recognized his own stick figure in several, always tall and standing protective near Elena and Miguel. "This is my room. Tia Elena says when we get more money, I can have glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling." "That sounds great. Do you have stars in your house?" David thought about the penthouse with its soaring ceilings and empty walls. "No, but maybe I should get some." "I can help you put them up." Tia Elena had to do mine by herself, and she's too short. Miguel demonstrated by stretching on tiptoes, barely reaching halfway up the wall. Back in the living room, Rosa handed David coffee in a mug that read, "World's Best Abuelo," clearly borrowed from someone's grandfather. Elena was sorting papers on the small table, creating organized stacks from chaos with practiced efficiency. She'd changed from her work clothes into jeans and a sweater that had been mended at one elbow, comfortable in a way that made David acutely aware he'd never seen her relax before. "Miguel giving you the full tour?" "He's very thorough." David settled into the only chair that didn't look like it might collapse. "Your home is lovely." "It's small." Lena didn't say it apologetically, just stating fact. "But it's ours." Rosa made a sound of agreement. "Better than the shelter we were in after Elena lost the house." "Mom, what? It's true. After Carlos died and Elena couldn't work, we lost everything. 6 months in a shelter before we got this place." Miguel was 4. He still has nightmares sometimes. The casual revelation hit David like a blow. He'd known Elena struggled financially but hadn't understood the depth, the actual homelessness, the shelter system, the trauma that shaped a child's sleep. Miguel was coloring on the floor now, seemingly oblivious to adult conversation. But David wondered what nightmares looked like for a boy who'd lost his mother to drugs and his home to poverty. Elena's face had gone tight with embarrassment or old shame. "We're fine now. We've been here a year. It's stable." Until Monday. Rosa's pragmatism was brutal. If the company sells, Elena loses her job. Then we're not going back. Elena's voice carried steel. "I won't let that happen." David felt the weight of their hope pressing against his ribs. This family's entire stability resting on a board vote he might not win. The responsibility should have been paralyzing, but instead it clarified everything. This was what mattered. This was worth fighting for, not abstract principles, but specific people with names and fears, and hard-won stability that could evaporate with one wrong decision. "You won't have to. We're going to win Monday." Rosa studied him with eyes that had seen too many promises broken to accept easy assurance. "You seem like a good man, David, but good men lose sometimes." "What happens to my daughter and grandson then?" "Then I make sure they're taken care of anyway. I have resources." "We don't need charity." Elena's voice was sharp. "I told you that. It's not charity if I owe you. You've been doing my job better than I have for 4 years. You kept my grandmother's legacy alive while I forgot it existed. That's worth compensation. After you sell the company I helped save?" Her laugh was bitter. "That's exactly charity." They stared at each other across the small living room, tension crackling like static electricity. Miguel looked up from his coloring, sensing conflict with the radar children developed in unstable environments. "Are you fighting?" "No, mi amor." Elena's voice softened instantly. "Just talking about work." "But you sound mad." "I'm not mad at Mr. David." "Then why are you using your mad voice?" David found himself fighting a smile at the boy's perception. "Your aunt is right to be upset. I'm making promises I'm not sure I can keep." "That's frustrating." Miguel considered this with serious concentration. "Tia Elena says trying really hard is the same as keeping promises sometimes, because trying is all anybody can do." Out of the mouths of children came philosophy that shamed adult cynicism. Elena's expression crumbled slightly, pride in her nephew mixing with the exhaustion of someone who'd been trying really hard for years without much to show for it. Rosa wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron, not bothering to hide emotion. David knelt down by Miguel, meeting him at eye level the way he'd learned to do. "You're right, and I promise I'm trying really hard to make sure your Tia Elena keeps her job and you get to stay in this apartment with the stars you're going to have on your ceiling. And you'll visit us even if we have to move?" The question revealed the transience of Miguel's young life, the expectation that good things ended and people left. David felt his throat close with anger at circumstances that taught a 5-year-old to prepare for abandonment. "I'll visit you wherever you are. That's a promise I can keep absolutely." Miguel hugged him with the fierce grip of someone claiming ownership, and David's arms came around the small body automatically. Over the boy's shoulder, he saw Elena crying silently, Rosa gripping her daughter's hand, both of them undone by the simple assurance that someone would stay. Later, after Miguel had fallen asleep and Rosa had retreated to her room, Elena walked David to the door. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of old radiators and distant traffic. She stood close enough that he could see the shadows under her eyes, the worry lines that had no business on a 38-year-old face, the beauty that exhaustion couldn't diminish. "Thank you for today, for coming here, for being kind to Miguel, for not making our poverty feel shameful. Your poverty isn't shameful, it's unjust. Justice is expensive. I learned that when Carlos got sick." She leaned against the door frame, arms crossed over her chest in unconscious self-protection. "He was a carpenter. No health insurance. By the time we knew it was cancer, he had 3 months. We spent everything on treatment that didn't work. Then funeral costs. Then I couldn't work because grief made me unreliable. Then we lost the house. Then the shelter. Then this. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't pay rent." She looked at him with eyes that had learned to expect disappointment. I need you to understand something. I've been poor before and survived it. Rosa's been poor most of her life and survived it. We know how to do without. But Miguel, he deserves better than learning how to be hungry. So if you lose Monday, if the company sells and I lose my job, I need you to promise you won't forget us. That you'll help me find something else, not charity, a poem, a reference, connections, something. You have my word. Words are cheap, David. Everyone says things they mean in the moment. Then let me prove it. Starting now. He pulled out his wallet, extracting a business card and writing on the back. That's my personal cell and my lawyer's direct line. If anything happens, medical, emergency, rent crisis, anything, you call, day or night. I'll make sure you and Miguel are okay. Elena took the card like it might burn her. Why, we're not your responsibility. Because somewhere in the last 48 hours, you became important to me. You and Miguel, and I take care of people who matter. She studied him for a long moment, vulnerability and skepticism warring across her face. I knew who you were on day 3. I told you that, but I didn't tell you why I recognized you. Why? Because 6 months ago you came to the cafe. One visit, maybe 30 minutes. You were on your phone the whole time, barely looked at anyone. But when you left, you thanked me by name. You'd read my name tag and used it, and you looked at me like I was a person instead of furniture. It was such a small thing, but I went home and looked you up online. Read about your grandmother, about your wife, about how you built the company. And I thought, here's a man who's forgotten how to see people, but maybe he remembers somewhere deep down. David's breath caught. You've been watching me for 6 months? Not watching, hoping that if you ever came back, you'd be the man your grandmother raised instead of the one grief turned you into. Her smile was sad. Then you showed up undercover and I thought, maybe he does remember. Maybe it's not too late. It wasn't. You showed me how to remember. Don't give me too much credit. I just did my job. Your job is serving coffee. What you do is create sanctuary. That's what my grandmother did. That's what I forgot how to do. He wanted to touch her face to bridge the distance between them, but held back because timing mattered and this was too fragile to rush. After Monday, win or lose, I'd like to take you to dinner. Not as boss and employee, as people. Elena's eyes widened. David, think about it. You don't have to answer now. He stepped into the hallway, giving her space to process. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we change everything. Driving home through empty Seattle streets, David felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper. His phone buzzed with a message from Claire. Jonathan's camp is circulating a memo. Says you're emotionally compromised. Attach photos of you with Elena and Miguel at the diner Friday night. The attack was predictable but effective. David could see the narrative Jonathan would build. Lonely widower making poor decisions based on inappropriate attachment to employee, judgment clouded by grief and attraction. The board would eat it up, especially the members who'd been skeptical of David's recent changes. He called Claire back. Send out our own memo. Detail every financial benefit of the community model, every retention statistic, every dollar of value created. Include testimonials from all 43 locations. And Claire? Yes? Add a section about Margaret Mitchell, about why she started this company and what she believed business should be. Make them remember we're not just selling coffee. Got it. David, for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Even if we lose, especially if we lose, some things are worth fighting for even when the odds suck. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the rain finally breaking to reveal Seattle's rare winter sun. David dressed in the armor of his profession, tailored suit that cost more than Elena made in 2 months, Italian shoes that clicked against marble with authority, watch that had belonged to his father and marked time with Swiss precision. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw the CEO Jonathan Pierce expected, the businessman who made calculated decisions based on profit rather than sentiment. Then he pinned Miguel's drawing to his suit jacket with a paperclip, the bright crayon superhero cape visible against charcoal wool. The gesture was deliberate provocation, a signal that he'd chosen sides and wasn't pretending otherwise. The boardroom occupied the 40th floor of a building David's company didn't own, but rented for exactly these occasions. Neutral territory designed to intimidate, with floor-to-ceiling windows and leather chairs that cost more than reasonable furniture should. He arrived 20 minutes early to find Sandra Nguyen already there, setting up her laptop with grim determination. I brought additional financial analysis. She didn't waste time on pleasantries, showing long-term projections if we convert all locations to community model. The numbers are compelling. Will it be enough? For Margaret Hutchins, maybe. Thomas Wright is harder. He wants guarantees we can't give. She looked at Miguel's drawing pinned to David's jacket. That's either brilliant strategy or career suicide. Probably both. Robert Chen arrived next, carrying boxes of materials that represented 3 days of collaborative preparation. Claire followed with her tablet in the kind of focused intensity that came from knowing everything was riding on the next 2 hours. They set up their presentation in silence, each person moving with practiced efficiency born of shared purpose. The other board members filtered in, Thomas Wright with his retail executive bearing, Margaret Hutchins with her old money confidence, Gerald Foster and Patricia Cole, who'd already declared for Jonathan's camp. Last came Jonathan Pierce himself, immaculate in a suit that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent, carrying a thin folder that suggested he didn't think he needed much ammunition. He saw Miguel's drawing and smiled. Touching, David, but this is a business meeting, not kindergarten show and tell. This is exactly what it's about, what we're building and who we're building it for. We're building shareholder value, or we should be. Jonathan settled into his chair with the confidence of someone who'd already won. Shall we begin? The next 90 minutes were gladiatorial combat disguised as corporate process. Jonathan presented first, his argument brutally simple. Coffee Corp offered certainty, cash, and relief from liability. He showed projections of what David's community model would cost at scale, emphasized the flagship's losses, painted a picture of sentimentality destroying sound business. Then he played his trump card, photos of David with Elena and Miguel at the diner, in the cafe, at her apartment building. The images were grainy but clear enough to build narrative. David Mitchell is making decisions based on personal attachment to an employee. His judgment is compromised by loneliness and, frankly, inappropriate interest in someone who works for him. This isn't about community values or grandmother's legacy. It's about a widower in crisis making catastrophically bad choices because he can't separate business from whatever fantasy he's constructed about this woman and her child. The accusation landed with devastating precision. Margaret Hutchins frowned. Thomas Wright looked uncomfortable. Even Sandra shifted in her seat, the photos undermining the purity of their financial arguments. David stood, feeling fury and clarity in equal measure. You're right, I am attached to Elena Santos and her nephew. I am attached to Marcus Green and Ruth Campbell and 400 other employees whose names I didn't know 2 weeks ago. You know why? Because I forgot they were human. I reduced them to labor costs and efficiency metrics. I turned my grandmother's legacy into exactly what Jonathan wants to sell, corporate machinery that extracts value without creating meaning. He pulled up his own presentation, starting with Margaret's original cafe from 1962. My grandmother opened this place during a recession. She gave away coffee to unemployed men who couldn't pay. People told her it was bad business. Know what happened? Those men got jobs and came back as paying customers. They brought their families. They created word-of-mouth marketing worth more than any ad campaign. That one unprofitable cafe became the foundation of 43 locations and $180 million in annual revenue. Robert took over, showing retention rates and lifetime value calculations that prove compassion's return on investment. Claire displayed testimonials from customers whose loyalty had nothing to do with coffee quality and everything to do with being treated like humans rather than transactions. Sandra presented financial projections showing the community model wasn't just sustainable, it was superior long-term strategy. Then David showed Miguel's drawing, projected 8 feet tall on the screen behind him. This is what we're actually fighting about. Not quarterly reports or shareholder value. Whether a 5-year-old boy whose mother died of an overdose gets to keep the stability of watching his aunt go to work every day at a place that treats her with dignity. Whether veterans like Ron have an address to give the VA, whether the Martinez family has somewhere to practice English without judgment. Jonathan's right that I'm emotionally compromised. But emotions aren't the compromise, they're the point. Business without humanity is just expensive isolation. Margaret Hutchins spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the weight of old money and older values. David, this is very moving, but we have fiduciary responsibility. Coffee Corp's offer is substantial and guaranteed. Your model is unproven at scale. It's proven at 22 locations currently operating on this model. All have retention rates above 90%. All have lower turnover costs. All generate more long-term value than our corporate model stores. But they lose money in the short term. They invest money. There's a difference. We're not bleeding capital. We're building loyalty that compounds over years. Thomas Wright cleared his throat. David, I knew your grandmother. She'd be proud of your passion. But Margaret's right. Passion doesn't pay dividends. Can you guarantee this model works across all 43 locations? No, but I can guarantee the alternative doesn't work. The 6 locations we're about to lose, all corporate model. The 15 with declining revenues, corporate model. The model Jonathan wants to sell to Coffee Corp is actively failing. What Elena created is succeeding despite our official policies, not because of them. Jonathan leaned forward. So your plan is to legitimize theft? Because that's what Elena Santos did. She stole from company registers to fund her personal charity project. She invested company resources into customer loyalty. The return on that investment is $8,000 for every $2,000 spent. Show me a venture capitalist who wouldn't take those numbers. Context matters, David. She didn't have authorization. She made unilateral decisions about company resources. If we endorse that, we're saying employees can do whatever they want with our money. Sandra cut in. Jonathan, you're deliberately mischaracterizing this. Elena created a system that works. Rather than punish her for initiative, we should be replicating her model. With whose money? David's already admitted this costs millions annually. Millions that generate returns. The math works. Robert's voice was firm. I've run every projection. The community model is more profitable long-term by every metric that matters. Except the quarterly reports investors actually care about. Then we educate investors on better metrics. David felt the argument spiraling, sensed he was losing ground to Jonathan's pragmatism. My grandmother didn't build this company for quarterly reports. She built it because she believed business should serve communities, not extract from them. Margaret Hutchins' voice was gentle but firm. Your grandmother didn't have shareholders to answer to. We do. The room fell silent. David saw his support crumbling, saw Margaret and Thomas exchanging glances that suggested they'd made their decision. He thought about Elena and Miguel, about Rosa's pragmatic question, what happens to my daughter and grandson when you lose? And felt desperation clawed his throat. Then the conference room door opened. Elena stood in the doorway with Miguel holding her hand, both of them dressed in their best clothes that still screamed thrift store origins. Behind them crowded Marcus and Ruth, Ron the homeless veteran, Mrs. Peterson with her walker, the Martinez family with their 3 children, and at least 20 other customers David recognized from his week undercover. I'm sorry to interrupt. Elena's voice was steady despite obvious nerves. But I heard you were discussing whether this company should be sold, and I thought you should hear from the people who actually depend on it. Jonathan was on his feet. This is a private board meeting. Let her speak. Margaret Hutchins' voice carried unexpected steel. I want to hear this. Elena stepped forward, still holding Miguel's hand. My name is Elena Santos. I've worked at the Flagship Cafe for 4 years. Before that, I was a wife and a homeowner and someone who thought stability was permanent. Then my husband got cancer, stage 4 pancreatic. No insurance because he was self-employed. He died 8 months after diagnosis. We lost everything paying for treatment that didn't work. I lost my house, my savings, my ability to function. My sister was an addict who overdosed, leaving behind her son. I took Miguel in because the alternative was foster care, and I'd already watched too many people I loved disappear. Her voice never wavered, but her eyes shone with unshed tears. Mitchell's hired me when I was homeless, living in a shelter with my mother and a 4-year-old who had nightmares every night. They gave me a chance when everyone else saw liability. And over 4 years, I've tried to repay that by creating the same kind of second chance for other people. The veterans who need an address, the families learning English, the seniors whose children live across the country and whose only conversation happens over coffee at our tables. She looked directly at Margaret Hutchins. You want to know if the community model works? Ask Mrs. Peterson if it works. She comes every Tuesday because her husband died and this cafe is the only place she talks to anyone. Ask Ron if it works. He's been sober 18 months because Marcus texts him every morning with encouragement. Ask the Martinez children if it works. They learned English here and both got into college. Ask Miguel. She knelt down beside her nephew, who looked terrified by the room full of strangers in expensive suits. Mi amor, can you tell these people what the cafe means to you? Miguel's voice was barely above a whisper. It's where Tia Elena works, and where I color, and where Marcus gives me hot chocolate sometimes, and where Mr. David became my friend. And how would you feel if it closed? The boy's face crumpled. Sad. Because then Tia Elena would be sad, and we'd have to move again. And I don't want to move again. Margaret Hutchins had tears streaming down her face. Thomas Wright was staring at his hands. Even Jonathan looked uncomfortable. David felt his chest constrict with pride and terror. Elena had just gambled everything on this moment, had brought her nephew to plead their case because she understood that numbers alone wouldn't win hearts. Mrs. Peterson stepped forward, walker clicking against the polished floor. I'm 78 years old. My husband died 3 years ago. I don't see my children much. They're busy with their own lives. Every Tuesday I go to Mitchell's and Elena asks about my week. Marcus remembers I like extra foam. Ruth brings me the crossword puzzle from her paper. It's the only time all week I feel like someone sees me. If you sell this company to some corporation that trains staff to fake caring, I'll stop going, and I suspect I'm not alone. Ron spoke next, his voice rough from years on the street. I'm homeless. Have been for 6 years since Afghanistan messed me up. The VA needs an address to send my benefits. Elena let me use the cafe. Marcus keeps a locker for my mail. They never made me feel ashamed. That's worth more than your quarterly reports. One by one they spoke, customers whose lives intersected with the cafe in ways that transcended commerce. Parents who'd found community, kids who'd been mentored, elderly people who'd been seen. By the time the last one finished, even Gerald Foster looked shaken. Jonathan tried to recover. This is very touching, but anecdotes aren't business plans. Coffee Corp will maintain these programs. No, they won't. Sandra Nguyen's voice was flat. I read the contract, page 47, section 12C. Coffee Corp retains the right to close any location not generating $850,000 annually within 18 months. 22 of our locations don't hit that threshold. They'll keep the profitable stores and shut down everything else. 240 jobs gone. All these community programs erased. The room erupted. Margaret and Thomas both spoke at once, demanding to see the contract language. Jonathan's face went pale, then red, furious at being exposed. David felt vindication surge through him. Sandra had found the poison pill. You lied. Margaret's voice was ice. You promised no closures. It's standard contract language. It's a massacre disguised as a buyout. Thomas Wright stood, gathering his materials. I've heard enough. I vote to reject Coffee Corp's offer. Margaret nodded slowly. As do I. David, your model has problems, but at least it's honest. Jonathan's deal is predatory. I vote to retain current ownership and implement the community model across all locations. Sandra grinned. That makes 5 votes. Motion to reject the sale passes. David felt his knees go weak with relief. Around him, the customers who'd come to testify erupted in applause. Miguel jumped up and down, not fully understanding, but catching the joy. Elena stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, until Marcus hugged her and Ruth joined in, and suddenly they were all embracing in the middle of a boardroom that had never seen such unprofessional displays of emotion. Jonathan Pierce gathered his materials with rigid fury. This is a mistake. You're letting sentiment destroy sound business. I'm resigning from this board effective immediately. Good riddance. Sandra didn't look up from her laptop. We'll accept your resignation in writing by end of business today. He stormed out, taking Gerald and Patricia with him, the board suddenly -3 members but stronger for their absence. Margaret approached David with surprising warmth, touching Miguel's drawing still pinned to his jacket. Your grandmother would be proud. Not of the business model necessarily. She'd have thoughts about your financials, but of you remembering why it matters. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You've got 6 months to prove this works at scale. If the numbers don't improve, we're having this conversation again. Understood. Thomas Wright shook David's hand with firm respect. I served with your father in Vietnam. He always said Margaret was the smartest person he knew. Now I see it runs in the family. Good luck, son. You're going to need it. The board members departed, leaving David alone with his makeshift army of employees and customers. Elena approached slowly, Miguel still clutching her hand, both of them looking shell-shocked by what they'd just done. Did we really just crash a board meeting? You did, and you saved the company. David knelt down to Miguel's level. Thank you for being brave. I know that was scary. I didn't want Tia Elena to be sad, and I didn't want us to move again. You won't have to, I promise. He stood, meeting Elena's eyes. That was the gutsiest thing I've ever seen. I didn't know what else to do. Jonathan was winning with his numbers, and I thought, maybe if they saw us as people instead of labor costs. Her voice broke. I was so scared it wouldn't work. It worked because it was true, because you showed them what's at stake. He wanted to pull her into his arms, but they had an audience, and professional lines still mattered, even if they were blurring. You're not just an employee anymore, Elena. You're a partner in this fight, and I want to make that official. What do you mean? I mean I'm restructuring management, creating a new position, VP of Community Relations. Someone who understands what we're actually building and can replicate it across all locations. 75,000 salary, reports to Robert instead of regional management. Benefits include childcare assistance and housing stipend. Interested? Elena's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Rosa, who'd been standing quietly in the corner, burst into tears. Marcus whooped and lifted Miguel off the ground in celebration. Ruth gripped David's arm with arthritic fingers that were surprisingly strong. You mean it? Really? Really, Elena, you've been doing the job anyway. Now you'll get paid properly for it and have the authority to implement these programs company-wide, if you want it. If I want it, David, She pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Yes, God, yes, thank you. Miguel tugged on David's jacket. Does this mean Tia Elena gets to be the boss now? Kind of, yeah. Cool, will you be her boss? No, we'll be partners, like a team. Miguel considered this with serious concentration. Like a family? The question hung in the air, weighted with more significance than a 5-year-old could possibly understand, but hitting truth anyway. David looked at Elena, saw hope and fear and possibility in her eyes, and took the leap. Yeah, buddy, like a family. 4 months transformed everything and nothing. The flagship cafe still smelled like dark roast and possibility, still filled with morning regulars seeking more than caffeine, but the energy had shifted from survival to expansion. Elena moved through the space with new authority, clipboard in hand as she trained managers from other locations on community integration protocols. Her confidence had bloomed with responsibility. The tentative woman who'd once apologized for feeding hungry customers, replaced by someone who spoke about compassion's return on investment with data-backed conviction. David watched her from his usual corner table, the one that had become his office more than the penthouse ever was. Miguel sat beside him, working through kindergarten homework with the fierce concentration of someone determined to make his aunt proud. The boy's backpack was new, his shoes actually fit, and the shadows under his eyes had faded with the stability of knowing home wasn't temporary anymore. Mr. David, what's 3 plus 4? What do you think it is? Miguel counted on his fingers, lips moving silently. 7? Perfect. You're getting really good at this. Tia Elena says I have to be smart so I can go to college like the Martinez kids. He looked up with eyes that held too much awareness for 6 years old. Will you help me go to college? It costs a lot. The question was simultaneously heartbreaking and hopeful. This child already planning a future that included David's continued presence. Of course I will. That's what families do. Are we a family now, for real? David glanced at Elena across the cafe, saw her laugh at something Marcus was demonstrating with exaggerated gestures, and felt his chest constrict with emotion he'd spent months trying to name. Yeah, buddy, I think we are. The past 4 months had been a careful dance of professional partnership and personal restraint. Elena's promotion had shifted their dynamic from boss and employee to colleagues operating in different spheres. She reported to Robert. David focused on board relations and expansion strategy. They worked together constantly but maintained careful boundaries, neither willing to risk the fragile ecosystem they'd built by rushing into complications. But the tension was always there, humming beneath surface interactions. The way her hand lingered on his arm when she was excited about a new initiative. The way he found reasons to visit whichever location she was training at that week. The way Miguel had started calling him Tío David without anyone correcting him because it felt right even if they hadn't discussed what it meant. Rosa had recovered fully from her surgery, returning to part-time work at a community center where she taught cooking classes to immigrant families. She watched David and Elena with grandmother perception that missed nothing, occasionally dropping pointed comments about how long people should wait before admitting obvious feelings. Elena would change the subject with flustered determination, but David caught her looking at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. Expressions that suggested the restraint was costing her as much as it cost him. The company had transformed under their partnership. The community model rolled out to all 43 locations with structured budgets for customer assistance and employee discretion. Turnover dropped to 8% company-wide. Revenue increased 18% as retention rates climbed and word-of-mouth marketing proved more effective than any advertising campaign. The financial media that had predicted disaster now wrote glowing profiles about Mitchell's Coffee's innovative approach to stakeholder capitalism. But success came with scrutiny. A Seattle Times reporter named Morrison had been documenting the transformation, initially sympathetic, but lately asking pointed questions about David's relationship with Elena. The implication was clear. Powerful man promotes woman he's attracted to, uses company resources to fund their shared vision. The narrative was reductive and unfair, but not entirely wrong, and both of them felt the weight of appearances constraining what they might otherwise explore. David's phone buzzed with a message from Claire. Sarah's parents are in town. They want to meet. His stomach dropped. He hadn't spoken to Barbara and William Henderson since the funeral 2 years ago. The relationship strained by grief and their barely concealed judgment that his workaholic tendencies had contributed to Sarah's isolation during her final months. Elena appeared at his table, noting his expression with immediate concern. What's wrong? Sarah's parents. They're here and want to see me. That's good, right? You should maintain that connection. They blame me for not being there enough at the end, for letting my company obsession leave her alone while she was dying. He rubbed his face, exhaustion of old guilt surfacing. They're not wrong. Elena slid into the chair across from him, lowering her voice so Miguel wouldn't overhear. You know what I learned when Carlos died? Guilt is love with nowhere to go. You loved your wife. You made mistakes. Both things are true. But punishing yourself doesn't honor her memory. Living better does. When did you get so wise? When I had to explain to a 4-year-old why his mama wasn't coming back and his aunt was suddenly the only family he had. Grief teaches clarity or destroys you. I chose clarity. David held her gaze, this woman who'd survived losses that would have broken him, and felt something shift in his chest. Before he could find words to articulate it, the cafe door chimed and Barbara Henderson walked in with the kind of presence that came from old money and older heartbreak. She'd aged in 2 years, silver hair that had been elegant now seemed fragile, lines around her eyes speaking of tears shed in private. Her gaze swept the cafe with barely concealed disdain before landing on David. Recognition flickered, followed by something harder to define, grief or anger or both tangled beyond separation. David. Not a greeting, just acknowledgement. He stood, suddenly aware of how different he looked from the last time she'd seen him. Less polished, more present, happier in ways that probably seemed like betrayal. Barbara, thank you for coming. Your assistant said you work here now, in a coffee shop? I work from here, yes. It helps me stay connected to what we're building. Barbara's attention shifted to Elena, still sitting at the table, then to Miguel bent over his homework. Her expression went through complicated gymnastics, surprise, calculation, something that looked like hurt. Who are they? Elena Santos, VP of Community Relations. Her nephew Miguel. He gestured Elena over, watching her approach with professional composure despite obvious discomfort. Elena, this is Barbara Henderson, Sarah's mother. The two women assessed each other with the particular wariness of people who occupied overlapping spaces in a man's life. Barbara's gaze was clinical, noting Elena's youth and beauty, the warmth in her eyes when she glanced at David, the protective way she positioned herself slightly between him and potential threat. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Henderson. I'm sorry for your loss. David has spoken about your daughter with great respect. Has he? Barbara's tone was arctic. And you work together? We're partners in rebuilding the company's community focus. It's been very successful. I'm sure it has. The implication was clear. Beautiful young woman partners with lonely widower, predictable outcome follows. Barbara turned back to David. Can we speak privately? They moved to the office, leaving Elena to entertain Miguel, and David felt the temperature drop 20 degrees as Barbara closed the door with deliberate care. She stood with her back to it, arms crossed, looking at him with the judgment he'd been dreading. You're sleeping with her. No, we work together, that's all. David, I'm 72 years old. I know what chemistry looks like. The way she watches you, the way you light up when she's near. It's obvious. Even if I was, which I'm not, Sarah's been gone 2 years. I'm allowed to move forward. With an employee? With someone young enough to be... She stopped, recognizing the ugly direction of her argument. Sarah loved you. She spent her last months hoping you'd find happiness after she was gone. But this looks like midlife crisis, not healing. The accusation stung because it echoed his own fears. Elena isn't a crisis. She reminded me how to care about something beyond profit margins. She helped me remember what your daughter asked me to remember. That business should serve people, not extract from them. By promoting her and spending all your time in her cafe with her nephew? David, I'm not blind. That child looks at you like you're his father. What happens when this infatuation ends and you break both their hearts? It's not infatuation. Elena is... He stopped, realizing he was about to articulate feelings he hadn't admitted to himself fully. She's important to me. Miguel is important to me. And yes, I care about them in ways that complicate our professional relationship. But I haven't acted on it precisely because I don't want to damage what we've built. Barbara's expression softened slightly. Sarah made me promise something before she died. She made me promise that if you found someone else, I wouldn't make you feel guilty about it. She said you'd punish yourself enough without me adding to it. Tears welled in her eyes. But seeing you here, happy while she's gone, it's harder than I thought. I'm not happy she's gone. I'll never be happy she's gone. But I'm learning to be happy while carrying that grief. There's a difference. And Elena taught you that? She taught me that love doesn't divide, it multiplies. That healing isn't betrayal. That Sarah would want me to live instead of existing. He met Barbara's gaze directly. Your daughter was extraordinary. Nothing I feel for Elena diminishes what Sarah and I had. But I can't spend the rest of my life in a mausoleum of our past. Barbara was silent for a long moment, studying him with eyes that had watched her daughter die and now watched him choose life. Whatever she saw must have satisfied something because she nodded slowly. Invite me to dinner. With Elena and the boy. Let me see what you're building. Are you sure? No, but Sarah would want me to try. And if you're going to make a family with these people, I should know them. The dinner happened 3 days later at David's penthouse, the first time he'd entertained since Sarah's death. Elena arrived with Miguel and Rosa, all three clearly uncomfortable in the opulent space that screamed wealth beyond their experience. Miguel's eyes went wide at the floor-to-ceiling windows and city views that stretched to mountains. His whispered, "Wow," carrying the awe of someone who'd never imagined people lived like this. Barbara arrived with William, who'd been silent through most of their interactions but whose handshake was firm and eyes kind. He'd been a surgeon before retirement, someone who understood that life and death existed in proximity and that choosing life wasn't disrespecting the dead. The evening was awkward at first, conversations stilted as people navigated grief and class difference, and the peculiar tension of ex-in-laws meeting potential future family. But Miguel broke through with his usual unfiltered honesty, asking William about being a doctor and announcing that he wanted to be one too, so he could save people like Mr. David saved his aunt. Over dinner, catered because David still didn't trust himself to cook for important occasions, stories emerged. Rosa spoke about immigrating from Puerto Rico, working 3 jobs to send money home, watching her daughters grow up in a country that promised opportunity and delivered struggle. Barbara shared memories of Sarah as a child, bright and determined, wanting to be a doctor before the paths diverged. Elena talked about Carlos, about their dreams of stability that cancer had stolen, about rebuilding from rubble with a nephew who'd already lost too much. William surprised everyone by asking Elena about her community programs, genuinely interested in the mechanics of compassionate capitalism. She explained the model with data-backed confidence, showing how structured kindness generated measurable returns. He nodded along, occasionally interjecting with questions that proved he was actually listening. My daughter believed medicine should be accessible regardless of ability to pay. His voice was rough with memory. She took Medicaid patients when other doctors wouldn't because the reimbursement was terrible. Said healthcare was a human right, not a luxury good. Sounds like you feel the same about coffee. Elena's smile was surprised but warm. Coffee isn't life or death, but for some people it's the difference between isolation and connection. That matters too. After dinner, while Miguel showed Barbara his drawings and Rosa helped William understand some medical terms she'd been confused about, David and Elena stood at the windows watching the city lights below. The silence between them was comfortable but charged, months of careful restraint finally feeling unsustainable. Your in-laws are lovely. They're trying. It's hard for them seeing me move forward. Is that what we're doing? Moving forward? She turned to face him, vulnerability and hope mixed in her expression. Because 4 months of professional distance is killing me, David. I know we have to be careful about appearances. I know my promotion complicates things, but I can't keep pretending you're just my colleague when you've become everything. The word escaped before he could filter it. You've become everything, you and Miguel. The thought of going back to how I was before, the empty penthouse and meaningless routine, I can't do it. So what do? The board is watching, the media is watching. If we're together and things go badly, it destroys both our reputations and probably the company's community model. And if we're not together because we're too scared of what might go wrong, we miss out on something that could be extraordinary. He took her hand, the first deliberately intimate gesture in months. I'm tired of being afraid, Elena. I lost Sarah to cancer. I'm not losing you to cowardice. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm scared. Miguel is so attached to you. If this doesn't work, then we'll handle it together. But I don't think it won't work. I think we've been building toward this since that first morning when you saw through my disguise and let me discover the truth anyway. I didn't let you discover anything. You were impossible to miss in that terrible baseball cap. The cap was strategic. The cap was tragic. She was laughing now, tears streaming down her face. But you looked at me like I mattered, like feeding Ron and helping the Martinez family and raising Miguel while working full-time wasn't shameful poverty, but quiet heroism. No one had looked at me like that since Carlos died. Because it is heroic. You survived things that would have destroyed most people and turned your survival into service. How could I not fall in love with that? The confession hung between them, the words finally spoken after months of dancing around edges. Elena's breath caught, her hand tightening in his. You love me? Completely. Inconveniently. In ways that terrify me because I didn't think I could feel this after losing Sarah. But you taught me that love multiplies. It doesn't replace. What I feel for you doesn't diminish what I felt for her. It's new and different and entirely yours. She pulled him down by his collar and kissed him, with 4 months of restrained wanting finally unleashed. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her like she was precious and necessary and claimed, tasting salt from her tears and coffee from earlier, and something that was just Elena, warmth and strength and home. When they broke apart, breathing hard, Rosa was standing in the doorway with Miguel. The boy's face split into a grin. Are you kissing like in movies? Yes, buddy. Is that okay? Miguel launched himself at their legs, hugging them both. Finally! Abuela said you were taking forever. Rosa's smile was smug. I told you 4 months ago they were in love. But nobody listens to the old woman. Barbara appeared behind her, William at her elbow, both of them watching the scene with expressions David couldn't quite read. He braced for judgment, but Barbara surprised him by stepping forward and taking Elena's hand. Take care of him. He's a good man who forgets to take care of himself. Sarah loved that about him and worried about it constantly. I will, I promise. And you, Barbara turned to David, take care of them. This woman survived poverty and loss and still managed to raise a child who believes in superheroes. That's strength you should treasure. I intend to. William pulled him aside while the women talked, his grip firm on David's shoulder. Sarah asked me to give you something if you ever found someone new. I've been carrying it for 2 years. He produced a small envelope, worn at the edges. She wrote it a week before she died. Made me swear I'd only give it to you when you were actually ready to move on, not just dating out of loneliness. David's hand shook as he opened it, Sarah's handwriting swimming through unshed tears. David, if you're reading this, it means you found someone. I'm so glad. You were always meant for partnership, for building things with someone beside you rather than alone. I'm sorry I couldn't be that person longer. I'm sorry cancer stole our future. But I'm not sorry you're moving forward. Grief is love with nowhere to go. Someone wise will probably tell you that. Let them teach you how to redirect it. Let yourself be happy without guilt. Let yourself build a new family if that's what you find. You gave me 8 beautiful years. Now give someone else the man you've become. Wiser, kinder, more human than when we met. The coffee empire doesn't need you. People do. Remember that. Love always, Sarah. He pressed the letter to his chest, feeling grief and gratitude in equal measure. Elena moved to his side, reading his expression, if not the words, and took his hand in silent support. Miguel hugged his leg. Rosa murmured something in Spanish that sounded like prayer. Barbara and William stood witness to this moment of release, giving him permission he'd needed but couldn't ask for. She knew. His voice cracked. She knew I'd need this. She knew you. Barbara was crying openly now, and she loved you enough to let you go. The evening ended with embraces and promises to stay in touch, Barbara extracting a commitment for monthly dinners, and William slipping Miguel his card with instructions to call if he ever wanted to talk about being a doctor. When they left, David stood with Elena and her family in his penthouse that suddenly felt less like a mausoleum and more like a space that could hold new memories. Rosa kissed his cheek. You're good for my daughter. Don't screw it up. I'll try not to. Trying isn't enough. Do better. But she smiled as she said it, taking Miguel's hand. Come, mijo. Let's go home so the adults can talk. After they left, David and Elena stood in the sudden silence of 2 people who just crossed a threshold and weren't sure what came next. She looked around the penthouse with new eyes, seeing it as potential home rather than client's property. This is a lot of space for one person. I've been thinking about that, about how ridiculous it is to have 3 empty bedrooms when you and Miguel and Rosa are crammed into a 1-bedroom apartment. David, I'm not asking you to move in, not yet, but maybe eventually, if things go well, this could be somewhere that fits all of us. She turned to face him fully, taking both his hands. I need you to understand something. I'm not a project you're fixing. I'm not a charity case you're rescuing. If we do this, we're partners. Equal. I bring as much to this relationship as you do, even if my contribution isn't measured in real estate or bank accounts. I know that. You bring purpose and wisdom and a nephew who teaches me more about living than any business degree. You bring the ability to see people, really see them, in ways I'd forgotten how to do. That's worth more than money. Good answer. She kissed him again, softer this time, but no less significant. We should take this slow, for Miguel's sake and for ours. Figure out how to be together without rushing into complications we're not ready for. Agreed, but Elena? Yes? I'm not letting you go. Whatever happens with the company or the board or public opinion, we'll figure it out together. You taught me that love multiplies. I'm going to prove you right. She smiled against his lips. I'm always right. The sooner you learn that, the better. They spent the next hour on the couch, talking about logistics and boundaries and how to tell Miguel without making promises they couldn't keep. Eventually, Elena needed to get home, but she lingered in the doorway, reluctant to end the evening. Thank you for dinner, for including my family, for Sarah's parents being kind. They loved you. Miguel won them over completely. He has that effect on people. She touched his face with gentle fingers. I'll see you tomorrow. Every tomorrow. After she left, David stood at the windows watching the city lights blur through tears he'd been holding back all evening. Sarah's letter sat on the counter, permission granted and burden lifted. He thought about Margaret and her coffee cup, about ordinary moments holding treasure, about love that multiplied instead of dividing. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Miguel wants you to know you're officially part of the family now. Abuela confirmed it, no takebacks. He smiled, typing back, best contract I ever signed. The penthouse felt different now, less like a shrine to the past and more like a bridge to the future. David pulled out Margaret's old coffee cup, the one Elena had seen that first day, and filled it from his espresso machine. The coffee tasted better than it had in years, rich with possibility and promise, and the particular sweetness of choosing to begin again. Outside, Seattle sparkled with lights that represented thousands of lives intersecting in ways large and small. Somewhere in that constellation, Elena was tucking Miguel into bed, Rosa was saying her evening prayers, and a family was forming from the wreckage of separate griefs. David raised his cup in silent toast to Margaret and Sarah, to the women who'd taught him different lessons about love, and to Elena, who'd shown him that both lessons could coexist in a heart willing to expand. Tomorrow they'd face whatever challenges came with public relationships and corporate scrutiny. Tonight he let himself feel the uncomplicated joy of loving someone who loved him back, of being seen completely and chosen anyway, of building something new without demolishing what came before. The coffee cup felt warm in his hands. Outside, the city breathed with possibility. And for the first time in 2 years, David Mitchell felt completely, perfectly alive.